everyone, welcome to Telltale Tuesday. I am with one of my favorite authors, Helen Sedwick, who is an author and attorney, and you may have heard of her because she's represented small businesses and entrepreneurs for more than 30 years. Her historical novel, Coyote Wins, has earned 5-star reviews from Forward Reviews and is an Indie Brag Medallion honoree. Publishers Weekly lists her self-publishing legal handbook, which we're going to be talking about, as one of the top resource books for independent authors. And her blog coaches writers on everything from saving on taxes to avoiding scams. For more information, I will drop a link to her website below. But you can also, of course, check out this interview and then go and buy her book, either this copy or the new edition, which we will be talking about.
Which is the new edition here, or newer.
Newer, yes. Thank you so much for being here, Helen.
Glad to be here. I'm glad to help writers any way I can.
Yes, so I have been referring out to your book for years. I love it. It's what we use here at Telltale. So whenever people have questions, we send them to your book. But we have some people come up and ask questions that we don't know how to answer. So I would love to hear your advice. But before we get into it, can you just tell me a little bit more about yourself and your background? Like, how did you get into this interesting little niche of, self-publishing and legal support?
I've been a lawyer for a long time. Many lawyers are closet writers who lost their nerve. And so I also continued to write on the side, and then wrote a book, which I was very proud of. Couldn't get it published traditionally, so I went the self-publishing route and published an historical novel, Coyote Wins, in 2013. And when I published that, and I would go to writers' meetings and conferences, and I'd get asked questions, what I realized is that there was a big gap in the knowledge universe for writers, and that was to deal with the legal issues of taking the step into self-publishing. Because it was daunting to many writers. There's the business side. If you're self-publishing, you're actually starting a small business. And then they're terrified of these contracts. And I really set out to write a very user-friendly, common sense approach through my blog, and then through the first edition, and then I expanded it in the second edition about just covering, what are the topics? There are copyright issues, pen names was something you mentioned to me, small business issues, and then quite a bit I spent, especially in the second edition, I spend more time on writing, if you're writing about real people, what's completely safe and easy, where the potential landmines are, and how do you minimize those risks. So today, ask me questions. In many cases, I'll be giving the short answer, and a less short answer will be in my book. But even with these short answers, I hope that writers will realize, they'll hear what the lingo is. So they'll know what questions to ask and what to look up on the internet, or how to get more help. You're not going to become lawyers in an hour, but if you know where to start, sometimes that's the hardest part. So glad to help.
Yes, I think that's a brilliant way to put it. And so to kick things off, what are some of the most important considerations that self-published authors need to be aware of as they're getting started with this self-publishing journey?
First, I want to give them some assurances about their copyright, because a lot of authors, or if they're starting to make the transition from writing for themselves to reaching out to others, they worry about their work getting stolen. First, the assurance is under current copyright law, you own the rights to your work as soon as you put it in a tangible form, which is on a piece of paper or on your computer. It used to be you had to publish it and put a notice on it and register your copyright. None of that's required now. You own it right away, and the copyright lasts for your entire lifetime plus 70 years. So that's a long time. Owning the copyright means that you have the right to publish it, create films, plays, translations, and to the extent you might even sequels and prequels, to the extent that it's your story world that's part of these other works. You don't own the generic portions of your book. If you have places, historical figures, historical stories, the story idea itself. And if you're building your story on Pride and Prejudice, that's in the public domain. So to the extent that you're using already work that's already exists or that's simply just factual and generic, everybody owns that. So you own something of value. The next thing to realize is if you're going to be signing contracts, you need to learn a little bit about the nuts and bolts of those contracts. And I do go into my book about what it is. You're not selling your book entirely. What you're selling is what's called a license. You're selling permission for a publisher, which could be a self-publishing company, to work with you and to publish your book, let's say as an audiobook, or as a printed book in English, or as a printed book in Spanish, or an ebook in Chinese. You need to learn that in many ways, a license, your book is like an apartment building, and you're going to rent out different apartments in the building for different things and different purposes. What you don't want to do is sign a contract with a small little publisher or a self-publishing company that gives them the right to the whole entire apartment building when all they're doing is printing your ebooks in English or something. So you need to not be intimidated by the contract. I provide tools on how to look at a contract. Mostly it's knowing where to start. It's looking at that license, that grant of rights, and how narrow or how broad that should be. So it's taking the time and not being intimidated by a contract, or if you're offered a contract by a publisher, not being afraid to ask questions and push back. They're going to think that's a smart business person. The last thing is you are starting a small business. Again, don't be intimidated by this. There are very simple things you can do to set yourself up as a business, such as getting a new tax ID number for that business so you don't have to give out your social security number. If you want to use a pen name, how to adopt that. Again, nuts and bolts things. Those are the easy parts once you know what they are. And I lay that all out.
Yeah, I love what you said about not giving away the whole apartment building. And there's a part, in the end of the book where you do go through different terms. So when people are reading this, they can see the types of things to look out for so that they're not granting exclusive rights to their work, which, like you said, some people don't know it yet. But this brings me to an interesting question, because you mentioned copyright lasts your lifetime and then 70 years. So sometimes I have people who come to me who want to publish a book from their deceased mother, for example. What sort of advice do you have for people who want to publish work like this?
Great question. I'm assuming that the work was written in the 1970s or later, because there's different, actually, if it's earlier, it's more wide open. But if your mother wrote a book in the 1980s and it's been sitting in her desk and you decide to turn it around and publish it, if you are the heir of your mother's estate, or even one of many heirs, let's say you're one of 5 kids and everything was left to the 5 kids, each one of those kids has the right to publish the book. Everybody owns those rights, and any one of them could publish that book. You would have the right. If you shared those rights with 4 other siblings, you'd have to share any profit from that book with your siblings. And the same goes if one of your siblings published it. But if you are the heir to your mother's rights, then you have the right to publish it, and you are now one of the copyright owners.
Perfect. So in that case, when they're publishing, when they register for copyright, how would they go about registering it to make sure that's transferred?
First, I'll back up for a second. And when people say, oh, I copyrighted my book, what they often mean is that they took the copyright they already own and they registered it with the U.S. Copyright Office, which is something you'll need to do if you ever want to sue anybody for copyright infringement. Also, it just, for many writers, helps you sleep better at night. It's not very expensive. It was $35. I think it's about to go up to $45, and you can do it online, and then you send in a copy of your book. But it's something you should do. It's a cheap form of peace of mind. So let's go for that. So you would register it as you would be the copyright owner, or there are a bunch of questions. It would say who created it. If you're the copyright owner, you might have to append something saying that you're an heir And if they ask a question, it's probably going to be 6 or 8 months later. They might ask you for supporting documentation, but most likely you just fill in blanks. And if you run into a problem, I believe they used to have a call-in number with COVID. I'm not sure what they're doing, but you could go on hold and ask somebody. But it's better to put something in, even if you're kind of filling in the blank, because you'll flag it and eventually someone will call you. But in the meantime, you've gotten the registration process started.
Yes, that's perfect. And just to clarify, I think now in some cases it's maybe 65 per registration. It's gone up in the past.
Yeah, if you're doing a collection of work, for instance, if you're putting together an anthology and you've got work from 5 different authors, then that'll be a collection that will be more expensive. But still, not in the scheme of things, if you're self-publishing and want to go for a print book with a professional cover and with the typeset professionally, you're probably going to be spending $5,000 anyway. An extra 45 or 65 is not going to make that much difference.
Absolutely. And like you said, you're paying for peace of mind. So that's very smart. And then the second question I have is, what do you have to say for people who want to publish under a pen name? And I hear this all the time where people say, oh, can I just choose any pen name? You know, what if I wanted it to be Harry Potter? Or what if I wanted it to be my mother's name? Can you talk a little bit about how to make sure you're choosing a safe pen name?
First thing I should warn people is that writing under a pen name that's not a variation of your name, like you're using your middle name or initials. If you're going to use a real start from scratch pen name, it makes your life more complicated because you probably have a platform in your normal name. You're going to have to maintain 2 different platforms and you're going to have to decide how secret you want it to be or how transparent. And you're going to get it mixed up. You're going to use the wrong name in the wrong place. But if you want to use a pen name, again, my recommendation is you use some variation of your own name. Otherwise, you do need to do some research to see whether somebody else, especially if somebody of some known brand, I would not use that same name because a name like Harry Potter is not only a name, it's a trademark. They've used it to identify a product in the market. So you don't want to use anything that someone could claim as a trademark, something that identifies their product that buyers associate with them, because they will stop you from doing that. So try to come up with something different. Go on Amazon. You don't want to have another author with the same name, preferably, because it's just going to cause confusion and make it harder for people to find you. So come up with something unique. Then you also want to come up, there are other factors, marketing factors, such as you want to make it easy for people to read quickly, easy for people to pronounce. Maybe it can have the tone that you're trying to capture in your persona, whether it's kind of sultry or brittle or hard. I mean, there's all kinds of the sound of it, how the letters shape. There are factors, I do discuss them, and all these things I have blog posts on as well. And then once you decide on a name, that becomes like your trade name in a sense, and you treat it as a trade name. So you file what's called in most places, called a fictitious business name statement, or a DBA, doing business as filing, to kind of claim that name. You own this trade name, Jane Doe. Most places will want you to put Jane Doe Books or Jane Doe Publications. So it's not just a name, it's identifying this name with a business.
Perfect.
Hopefully that demystifies it.
Yes, I think that really helps a lot of people. And is there anything that you notice that most self-published authors do that is a big mistake?
They sign on with the wrong companies. There are a lot of people in this business who take advantage of people's dreams. And they exploit people's desire to be remembered, to be recognized, and they'll sell you a bill of goods. And what happens is people sign a contract without looking at the key provisions. You don't have to read every sentence, but you have to read some key provisions. Then they find out this self-publishing company does a terrible job, and they never return calls, and they have to try to get out of this contract, and then they have to pay to get out of the contract. So take your time, do your homework. There are good companies out there. There are magazines like Self-Publishing Review or Self-Publishers Review. I think there's both of them out there. The Alliance of Independent Authors. all those companies track these self-publishing assist companies and rank them. They look at a number of different factors. So if you go to conferences, a lot of the self-publishing companies that are there and handing out their materials, they're not the ones you want to go with. Yeah, so just take your time. You've worked hard on your book, spend another couple hours researching these companies before you sign on. The information is there if you just take the time to look at it.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's really helpful because it is really scary. And like you said, a lot of companies are looking to capitalize on these people's dreams. And then, like you said, they might sign over their entire book for putting it into an EPUB or something like that.
Or you sign into, you join a contest, you submit to a contest. And if you look at the contest rules, merely by submitting to this contest, you're giving them the right to publish your book in all languages, in all countries, merchandising rights, movie rights, and that you have to give them a 6-month exclusive to look at to look at your manuscript before you can send it anyplace else. It's terrifying. And it happens all the time. It doesn't take long, and don't be scared to just slow down and take a look. I can tell any author who's written a book, even a short story and poems, you've done harder things. This is not as hard as writing a book, understanding what these contracts can do to you.
Yeah, and like you said, you don't have to read every word, right? It's just looking for those key provisions.
Yeah, let me see if I'll show you an example here. Dealing with contracts, the most important part of any negotiation is preparation. Just take your time, look at the contract, try and understand what it says, and then speak in normal speak. Here's an example of an overreaching contract. And this was a contest for an ebook in Chinese, I think. And that you grant them exclusive worldwide perpetual rights, print, audio, sound recording, analog, digital, all languages. And then later down here it says derivative books and merchandise based on the storyline, characters, text, illustrations. But here's an example of a limited license. You may not be able to get this small a license, but if you're self-publishing through a company, it should be this small. You grant the sole and exclusive right to publish the work in print and digital formats in English, in the United States and Canada during the term of this agreement. And the agreement probably says it's 5, term means the length, 5 years, 7 years, 8 years. So this is more what it should look like. And if you're self-publishing, you are hiring this company to work for you. And you have to keep approaching that way.
Yes, that is important. I think it's interesting, like just give an example at Telltale, our agreement is for 1 year. So we're not a self-publishing company in the sense that, we're not listed as the publishers. We help people publish, but it's for 1 year. So once that's done, and not even once it's done, but the author retains their rights. So when you're self-publishing, there should be no instance where you're really giving over your rights to your work.
Yeah, you're never giving them everything. It's always a license is permission. It should be a small box, small as an apartment as possible. There should be some synergy. This company that you're giving the rights to should be able to help you reach readers and manage the process of getting your product out to them. If there's no synergy there, if they can't make movies, you should not be giving them movie rights.
Definitely, especially for no advance.
No advance, no track record. I mean, and a lot of times, especially small publishers, they don't mean badly. They've taken a form off the internet. They don't even know what it means.
Right, and they might not ever do that, but they could. Imagine your book becomes, I think of like E.L. James, who did the Shades of Grey. That became
or The Martian. The Martian was self-published.
Yes.
And it went on to become a movie, and 50 Shades of Grey became a movie.
And if you accidentally gave your rights away, they would certainly capitalize on that when they could.
Right, and you would do all the work.
But this is interesting. This brings me to another point, because I think when you publish traditionally, there's the sense that the company will kind of handle the tax situation for you. When you're self-publishing, I guess we can talk about two different options. One is if you self-publish through a print-on-demand platform like KDP or Lulu. And the other is if you, let's say, publish through a small printing press and sell the copies yourself. What sort of things do authors have to keep in mind when they're selling their books like that for tax purposes?
A couple things. I'm going to, on the mundane level, if you are physically selling your books, either through your website and you're shipping them, you're going to fairs and you're selling them, you're going to have to pay sales tax. And you're going to have to learn in your state, in almost all states, you're going to have to register with the state and get something called a seller certificate or a resale certificate. And then you can have another number in your life, your resale number. That means you can buy your books from Ingram Spark or some other printer. You can buy them without paying sales tax, but when you sell them, you're going to have to start charging and collecting sales tax and filing a sales tax return and, and sending it into your state. So that is one thing. Then on the general level, the tax codes encourage people to start new businesses. There are ways to get tax breaks from starting a new business. And you might as well take advantage of them, because even if you think you'll never make a profit from your book, you might, and you might as well take advantage of some of the tax breaks. To do that, you really will need to have some of the attributes of a business, which includes filing sales tax returns, having a separate bank account, having a separate tax ID number for your business, keeping separate records for your business, and preferably through separate accounts. If you do that, you're going to be able to deduct more of your expenses when you're losing money. Once you're making money, that's a different story. And I hope everybody has this problem. And part of the problem of success is once you start making money, you actually are going to have a few more tax complications. Under current tax law, and this changes all the time, if you pay somebody more than $600 or $600 or more, you're going to have to give them a 1099. If you make from your self-publishing net income more than $400 in a year, you're going to have to pay your own Social Security tax on that amount. If you're making more than, if the taxes on your self-employment income are more than $1,000 a year, you also have to pay estimated tax. So these are the downsides of being a business. Hopefully you're making enough that you can maybe hire somebody to help you do this. But this is one of the reasons why I wrote my book, is these are the things that writers need to see their hands held so they know what it is they have to do mechanically. And then they can do it. It can become a very good procrastination tool to avoid writing when you want to. Oh, I have to do my tax returns. But it's something to just know about and just set aside an hour or two a month and just sit down and figure out what you've made and what you've spent.
So what would you say for authors who maybe are only going through one platform? So for example, let's say they're using Amazon's KDP platform, which used to be CreateSpace, and they don't want to register as a business. They don't want their own ISBN. They just want the ASIN from the platform. How might they be able to go about it? I imagine it's a little bit easier for that group.
It can be. You can keep it much easier. First of all, if you're not physically selling the books, then you don't have to worry about sales tax. Amazon pays it because it is the retailer, or Barnes & Noble, or independent bookstores, they're all doing it. And then what will happen is Amazon will send you a 1099 at the end of the year for what you've earned. So then you will have to do some paperwork because you're going to have this income. And so if you've had expenses that are related to it, you want to deduct the expenses from the income when you're reporting your taxes. And that can be as simple as that. It can be matching your income and your expenses. Otherwise, if you really want to keep it simple, you never keep track of your expenses and you just report the income, which for some people, if your income is $200, why go through the mental pain?
Yeah.
But that's planning for failure. I want people to be ready for success. I want their 1099s to say they made $25,000 from Amazon last year. And
That would be amazing. Yeah.
yeah, and then, part of the price of success is you need to then maybe talk to an accountant and get a couple hours of their time and file the right forms.
Absolutely, and stay organized. And I love this approach because if you can do it in advance, everything becomes a little bit easier when maybe mishaps come up or you need to, like you said, write down an expense or take something out. And the other question a lot of people have is about fair use. So a lot of people I work with, they might not fully understand the whole kind of concept of fair use. So people might say things like, oh, but I saw this image on the internet. Can I use it for my book? And the answer is no, usually. But I want to hear a little bit more about kind of Creative Commons and fair use.
Sure, you see a cute kitten photo on the internet and you want to paste it on your blog post to get attention or put on the cover of your book. Don't. You need to, you recall earlier I said with copyright, you no longer have to put the copyright notice on it. So just because you don't see a copyright notice on the cute kitten photo doesn't mean somebody doesn't own it. There are ways to search an image. Like if you really want to use an image and you want to see who might own it, you can, through Google Images, you can actually upload an image or put a URL for an image and search it. If that image is owned by what's called a stock image company, these are companies where you can buy a license to use images, sound clips, all kinds of things, usually pretty cheaply, $25 or something. And you, for the life of you, you can use this coyote. Other people can use this coyote, but you can too. If your image that you're about to use is owned by a stock image company and you use it anyway, you will probably get a letter from them at some point because they search the internet for unauthorized use and they will demand anything from hundreds to thousands of dollars. So I recommend against it. Again, it's a little bit of homework. Buy an image, buy the right to use an image if you want to use it. Fair use is more, the reason why people are confused about fair use is even lawyers and judges are confused about fair use. What fair use says is you may use a copyrighted image or text or material without permission for certain purposes. And those are commentary, reviews, education, transformative works, like if you're really changing the use in many ways for a new audience, that's very fuzzy, the boundaries there. So don't assume that any use is fair use. For instance, let's look at think about the kitten photo. If you're just pasting the kitten photo onto your book cover, really as an eye-catching decor, that's not fair use. If you're doing a blog post and you're looking at this kitten photo and you're criticizing its composition, its color, its use of how to use this image for how it was photoshopped, and you're discussing that image or criticizing it, that's fair use. So it's very limited. And I will encourage people to go to my website because I have 2 free downloads that walk through these things. One's called How to Use Memorable Images Without Paying a Fortune or a Lawyer. And the other one has to do with song lyrics. And I go through what is fair use, what is public domain, how to figure out who might own it, different search sites, and then sample letters on how to ask for permission.
Wonderful. And I think that's very important is, make sure, of course, if you're ever using, like you said, a song lyric, depending on the length and depending on how you're using it, you want to make sure you're getting permission so you don't get one of those cease and desist letters or a bill for $1,000 to take down.
Yeah. And since it's too long for you and I to go through the nuts and bolts of it, that's why on my helensedwick.com, on my resources page, I have a download that just walks you through this thinking process and gives some ideas about how to figure out who owns it, if anybody. Now, we should talk a moment about there are going to be a lot of works where you can't figure out who owns it. Or it was taken, it's a family photo that's been in this box in the attic for 50 years. If you're using that photo as part of a memoir or part of a discussion of the era, even a novel of the era, and it's more than 50 years old, then most likely that's going to be considered fair use and completely fine. And sadly, probably 90% of copyrightable works are sitting in attics and nobody knows who owns them. And if you do you do some homework to figure out if anybody might own it, you could take the chance and use it because I think it's a low risk. And then this work gets out into the public. It shouldn't be lost forever in an attic. That's a term for that is orphan works. If you're in that space, you're dealing with it, that's the word to look for, orphan works.
Yes, and the other point that I think is important to consider is if you are partnering with a publishing company, in theory, that company will also take that into account. So most publishing companies will not publish photos that you just send them unless they verify that you're the owner and things like that. When you're self-publishing, you usually have to do it on your own. So that's something really important to keep in mind. And the orphan works made me think of something you talk about in the most updated edition of the Self-Publisher's Legal Handbook, which is, what do I do if I'm writing about real people, not in a memoir? So what if I'm writing a book of poems about an ex-boyfriend?
Another big topic. First of all, I'll tell you what you don't need to worry about. If you are talking about people, writing about people, and publishing about people in a positive or neutral or historical context, like, you talk about Roosevelt and you say things that are in history, you don't need permission to do any of that. The legal risk arises where you might be disclosing damaging information about a person. Seriously damaging. It's not that your mother-in-law is a nag, but that your mother-in-law is a drug addict or a drug dealer. So if you are getting into the area of disclosing seriously damaging information, then you need to take some time and understand defamation and privacy issues. Defamation is a false statement of fact about a living person, not a dead person. You could always wait for people to die. About a living person that seriously damages their ability to make a living or participate in society. The privacy claim is a little bit different. It could be true in a privacy claim, but it's private information that is seriously damaging and not of public interest, which is a huge loophole. That is usually the loophole that gets people out, because it's the fact that you disclose some gossip and it becomes huge is in a sense evidence that it's of public interest. Usually privacy has been, claims have been limited to revenge porn, that area, or people who go on these reveal all TV shows and they disclose this incest by their uncle, 50 years ago that didn't need to be disclosed. In fiction and in poetry, it's very rare to have a defamation suit because it's easy enough to either mask the identity of a person or to say this is not factual information. It's opinion, it's expression, you're focusing on the writer's response to what happened, as opposed to a factual statement about what somebody did.
Yeah,
that help?
Yes, I think a lot of people are confused about how to do that, especially if it's not in memoir or something like that.
Memoir and nonfiction, it becomes a bigger issue. Especially if you have a deep-pocketed target. A lot of people say, if you write about my mom, I'm going to sue you. But when it comes right down to it, they don't have the money to, or often with memoirs, when somebody actually works on their memoir and tells the story, people say, yeah, I may not agree with all of it, but you found a truth. And what other people tell me is in a family memoir is often the people who are not included feel left out. So
you want to write about that family member.
Yeah. And also another thing is, especially people who are, if anyone's here they're writing about abuse or some kind of childhood trauma. The problem isn't writing about it. The problem is publishing. So separate the two processes. Write without thinking about the legal issues. Because if you think about the legal issues, it becomes another form of self-editing. And self-editing is our enemy when we're in our creative space. So put that aside. It's only when you are ready to publish that you may have to take a step back and look at this and say, what risks are worth taking and what risks can I avoid? But you won't know how you can change your work that way until you've worked on it for a while and you know what message you're trying to send, and you know what you can change without losing your message if you have to change it.
Absolutely.
So separate that.
I love that idea of writing it first, and then before you publish, then that's a time to look at this, kind of censoring certain information or leaving stuff out, or deciding the risk, like you said.
And a lot of times, by the time you've gone through several drafts, your stories become more universal. It's become better, and you may find that there are things you can take out or change without hurting your story at all, which at the beginning you can't do because it's too close to you.
Absolutely. And finally, what are some things that you notice that a lot of self-published authors forget to do, but that might help them in the future?
Legal wise, record keeping is a problem, but the IRS hardly ever goes after anybody anymore. But record keeping can be a problem only because it takes you, when you actually try to sort out things, you end up wasting a lot of time.
Yeah.
Trying to catch up because you're trying to do it right. You're trying to do it right. Signing contracts, developing a budget. I would say that's a big thing up front. A little bit, it's kind of like a business plan. Even if it's just 2 pages, is where do I want to go? How do I want to get there? What can I spend to invest in this that I can afford? When am I getting into the place where I'm actually creating more pressure on myself rather than less pressure if I spend money? That's like take off your creative hat and be a business person for a bit and do a budget and rethink it from time to time. Don't just go out there believing that the world is ready for you. It takes a lot of work for the world to learn about you, and you want to budget so that you can get the most bang for your buck.
Yes, and I love that idea of revising, because no one knew what was going to happen with COVID, right? So when you have these plans for marketing and selling, and the world shifts, you have to adapt and decide, okay, is it worth it, and what type of money can you spend, like you said, without placing too much strain on you, because it shouldn't be about that.
Right. I mean, and there'll be other writers who are older and at that point of their life, and they say, well, I don't want to spend 5 years marketing myself. So I'm willing to risk $5,000 to hire a PR person, and other people aren't. So it's an individual decision. And don't put yourself in a position where the book becomes something painful for you.
Absolutely. And just to wrap it up, I want to talk about the difference. So I've been loving this edition. I know you have a new edition out. Can you talk a little bit about what's new in the new edition?
Yes. And I have to thank writers, because writers kept asking me questions and I go, oh, I didn't cover that. So, like, for instance, pen names, I didn't cover it. Disclaimers. I spend more time on the nuts and bolts of setting up a business and much more time on using real people. Those are the biggest. I still take what was, and when I published this contract you sign with Amazon Direct Publishing, when you publish with them, and I take key provisions and I tell you what they mean. And because speaking in abstract is only so helpful. You really need to see examples. So I do at the end of the book, I have a chart and I go, one side is what it says and the other side is the interpretation of what it means.
Perfect.
So that's still in the second book.
Yes.
Interestingly, I got this from Amazon and they had left that out. I hope there are, if you ever get, and then the rest of my box had it in there. So I don't know whether they just, it's something you should actually, every once in a while, I don't know if you tell this people, but every once in a while, you should order your book off of Amazon and take a look at what people are getting. And if somehow Amazon's making a mistake, you want to know, this is one way to find out whether they're making a mistake with your book.
Yeah, and that's a really big point, because when you go with print on demand, there's a lot of pros to it. Like, yeah, you can get your book out to a large number of people pretty easily. You don't have to worry about the distribution as much, but then they're printing so many books that a lot of times, a lot of people I work with will notice they might have binding issues. So, depending on the print on demand company you go with, their quality control is going to be different. So they let this slide in one copy, but then they have all these other copies, and who knows if the person just stepped away for a second to go to the bathroom while your book is printing. But that's a really good point. Yeah, this was brilliant. It was an honor speaking with you. Like I said, I've been a big fan of your work, and I just wanted to hear, what are you doing now? I noticed on your website, you said you were putzing around in the garden. Tell us about that.
I've retired as a lawyer, so I'm not reviewing manuscripts or doing that. I'm doing some talks and giving general information. I'm actually working on a couple screenplays. I'm writing more. I'm puttering in the yard. I'm doing my yoga classes. COVID changed things, and I'm writing. It's time for me.
Well, Helen, this was my pleasure. Thank you so much for chatting with us. I know the Telltale audience is going to be really excited about this, because we are all longtime fans, and I really appreciate you spending the time with me today.
Glad to do it anytime.